The blood on her dress had dried to a rust-brown stain by the time Jack Morrison found her makeshift camp in the Cottonwood Grove, 3 miles west of Cheyenne, Wyoming territory, on a crisp October morning in 1878. He had been tracking a strayed mare when he noticed the bent branches, the carefully arranged pine boughs that formed a crude shelter against the elements. Jack dismounted slowly, his hand instinctively moving to the colt at his hip, not out of aggression but caution born from years working cattle across unforgiving land. What he saw made his chest tighten with an emotion he could not immediately name. A young woman, perhaps 23 or 24 years old, sat huddled beneath the makeshift lean-to, her arms wrapped around her knees, her dark blonde hair tangled with leaves and twigs. Her green eyes were wide but defiant, like a cornered animal that still had fight left in it. "Easy now," Jack said, his voice low and steady. "I am not here to hurt you." She did not respond, just watched him with those wary eyes, and he noticed the way her whole body trembled despite the layers of tattered clothing she wore. The dress had once been fine, he could tell, probably calico with small flowers, the kind a respectable woman might wear to church. Now it hung in strips, the bodice torn, and that stain across the skirt spoke of violence he did not want to imagine. Jack was 26, tall and broad-shouldered from years of hard labor, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and hazel eyes that held more gentleness than most men in these parts. He had learned early that kindness was not weakness, though his father had tried to beat that lesson out of him before Jack left home at 16 to make his own way. "My name is Jack Morrison," he continued, keeping his distance. "I have a ranch about 5 miles north of here. When did you last eat?" The question seemed to penetrate her defenses because her face crumpled slightly, and she looked away. "2 days," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse or crying or both. Without another word, Jack went to his saddlebag and pulled out the biscuits and dried beef he had packed that morning. He approached slowly, holding out the food like an offering. She snatched it from his hands and ate with a desperation that made his heart ache. He waited until she had finished, until some color had returned to her pale cheeks before he spoke again. "What is your name?" She hesitated, as if even that small piece of information might be dangerous to share. "Clara," she finally said. "Clara Brennan. Clara, how long have you been sleeping out here? A week. Maybe longer, I lost track." Jack looked at the shelter, at the way she had tried to create something resembling safety in a world that had clearly shown her none. The nights were already getting cold, frost appearing on the grass each morning. In another month, maybe less, the first snow would come and anyone caught unprepared in these woods would not survive. "You cannot stay here," he said gently. "Winter is coming and this shelter would not protect a rabbit, let alone a person. I have nowhere else to go." Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed her hand to her mouth as if she could push the emotion back down. Jack made a decision then, one that would change both their lives in ways he could not yet fathom. "Come with me. I have a barn at my ranch. You can stay there while I figure something out. I promise you will be safe." Clara looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for signs of deception or cruelty. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly and gathered the few possessions she had. A thin blanket, a small leather satchel, and a photograph in a bent frame that she clutched to her chest. The ride back to the Morrison ranch was quiet. Jack had lifted Clara onto his horse and she sat in front of him, her body rigid with tension. He could feel her fear, the way she flinched at every unexpected sound, and he kept his touch light on the reins, careful not to crowd her. The ranch appeared over the rise, a modest spread with a small house, a barn and corrals that held a dozen horses. It was not much, but Jack had built it with his own hands over the past 5 years, and he was proud of what he had accomplished. He helped Clara down and led her to the barn, which smelled of hay and horses and leather. "There is a tack room in the back," he said, showing her a small space with a window and a door that could be locked from the inside. "It is clean and dry. I will bring you blankets and more food." You can rest here as long as you need. Clara turned to him, and for the first time he saw tears in her eyes. Why are you helping me? Jack considered the question. Because someone should, he said simply. Because it is the right thing to do. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Jack brought Clara 3 meals a day, always knocking before entering, always giving her space to retreat if she needed it. He learned her story in pieces, fragments she shared when the weight of keeping them inside became too much. She had been traveling with her husband, a man she had married only 6 months earlier in Philadelphia. They had been headed to California, chasing the promise of land and opportunity, but 3 weeks into their journey, he had shown his true nature. The violence had started small, a cruel word here, a rough grip there, but it had escalated until Clara found herself fighting for her life on a lonely stretch of road outside Cheyenne. She had killed him. It was self-defense, but she knew the law rarely saw it that way when a woman raised her hand against her husband. So she had run, leaving his body by the roadside, and disappeared into the woods where she thought no one would find her. Jack listened without judgment, his jaw tight with anger at a dead man he had never met. You did what you had to do to survive, he told her. That does not make you a bad person, that makes you strong. Clara looked at him with wonder, as if she could not quite believe he was real. Most men would not see it that way. Then most men are fools. As October deepened and the aspens turned gold on the mountainsides, Jack found himself thinking about Clara constantly. He would be working in the corrals, breaking a new horse or mending fence, and his mind would wander to her smile, tentative but genuine, that had appeared when he brought her a slice of apple pie from the mercantile in town. He thought about the way she had started helping around the barn, mucking stalls and organizing tack, as if she needed to earn her keep even though he had asked for nothing in return. He also noticed how thin the walls of the tack room were, how the wind had started to whistle through gaps in the barn's siding. The temperatures were dropping faster than usual, and old-timers in town were predicting a harsh winter. Jack knew Clara could not stay in the barn much longer, but he also knew she was not ready to leave, not ready to face the world beyond his small ranch. So he made another decision. One evening in late October, as purple clouds gathered over the Medicine Bow Range to the west, Jack knocked on the tack room door. Clara opened it, and he was struck again by her beauty, not just the physical features but the strength that shone through despite everything she had endured. I want to build you a cabin, he said without preamble, a real one with a fireplace and proper walls, somewhere you can be warm and safe through the winter. Clara stared at him, her mouth slightly open. Jack, I cannot ask you to do that. You have already done so much. You are not asking. I am offering. Actually, I have already decided, so you would just be agreeing. He smiled, hoping to ease the intensity of the moment. There is a spot about a quarter mile from the main house near the creek. It has good drainage and protection from the north wind. I could have it finished before the first snow if I start tomorrow. Why? Clara whispered. Why would you do this for me? Jack met her eyes, and the truth rose up in him like a spring flood. Because I care about you, Clara. Because the thought of you being cold or hungry or afraid keeps me up at night. Because in the short time I have known you, you have become important to me in ways I am only beginning to understand. A single tear rolled down Clara's cheek, and she brushed it away quickly. I am trouble, Jack. My husband, someone might come looking. There might be a price on my head. Then we will deal with it together, but I will not let you face another winter in these woods. I will not let you face anything alone, not if you will let me stand beside you. Clara took a shaky breath and then she nodded. Okay, she said. Okay, yes, thank you. Jack started work the next morning as the sun broke over the eastern plains, painting the grasslands gold and amber. He had chosen the spot carefully, a small clearing surrounded by lodgepole pines, where Clara could have privacy but still be close enough that he could check on her, could make sure she was all right. The creek burbled nearby, providing fresh water year-round, and the location offered a view of the mountains that took his breath away every time he looked at it. He began by clearing the ground and laying a foundation of stones he hauled from the creek bed. The work was backbreaking, but Jack welcomed the physical exhaustion. It kept him from overthinking what he was doing, from questioning the feelings that grew stronger every day. Clara came to watch him work, bringing him water and sandwiches, and eventually she started helping, holding boards steady while he hammered, mixing mud for chinking, her hands becoming calloused but capable. They talked as they worked, really talked, sharing pieces of themselves they had kept hidden from the world. Jack told her about growing up on a failing farm in Missouri, about a father who drank and a mother who died too young, about dreams of building something that was entirely his own. Clara spoke of her childhood in Philadelphia, of parents who had loved her but died in a typhoid outbreak when she was 19, leaving her alone and vulnerable. She had married Thomas Brennan because he had seemed like safety, like a way forward, and she had learned too late that some prisons have walls built of wedding vows. "I thought love was supposed to feel different," Clara said one afternoon as they took a break, sitting on a pile of lumber and watching clouds drift across the impossibly blue sky. "I thought it was supposed to feel like coming home, not like slowly drowning." Jack turned to her, his heart pounding. "It should feel like coming home," he said. "It should feel like the best parts of yourself reflected back at you. It should feel like someone sees all of you, the good and the broken and the scared, and chooses to stay anyway." Clara looked at him, her green eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Is that how you feel about me?" "Yes," Jack said, the words simple but weighted with everything he could not yet say. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers small and cool in his rough palm. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just being together as the wind whispered through the pines and the creek sang its endless song. The cabin took shape over the following weeks, growing from foundation to walls to roof. Jack worked with a precision and care that spoke of the feelings driving him. He built the fireplace from river rock, making sure the chimney drew properly so Clara would never be cold. He crafted shutters for the windows he had bought in town, spending money he had been saving for a new bull, but deciding Clara's comfort mattered more. He made the door thick and solid, with a good lock, because he knew she needed to feel secure, needed to know she could keep the world out if she chose. November arrived with a vengeance, bringing freezing rain and winds that howled down from the mountains. Jack worked through it all, sometimes so cold he could barely feel his fingers but refusing to stop. Clara scolded him, brought him hot coffee and made him come inside to warm up, and the way she fussed over him filled Jack with a warmth no fire could match. They grew closer during those weeks, the barriers between them crumbling like the autumn leaves that skittered across the ground. Clara started smiling more, laughing at Jack's terrible jokes, teasing him about his perpetually messy hair. She would touch his arm when she spoke, lean against his shoulder when they sat together in the evening, and each small contact felt like a gift Jack had not known he was waiting to receive. One night, as they worked by lantern light to finish the interior walls, Clara suddenly set down her hammer and turned to Jack. "I am falling in love with you," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the confession. "I know it is too soon, and I know I am a mess, and I know I might bring nothing but trouble into your life, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel." Jack set down his own tools and crossed the small space between them. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "Clara Brennan, I have been in love with you since the moment I saw you in those woods, looking fierce and terrified and more alive than anyone I have ever met. Nothing about you is trouble. Everything about you is a gift." He kissed her then, gentle at first, asking permission with every movement. Clara responded with a hunger that spoke of loneliness and hope and the desperate need to be cherished. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she pressed her forehead against his chest and whispered, "I never knew it could be like this." "Neither did I," Jack admitted. "Neither did I." The cabin was finished on a gray morning in mid-November. just as the first snowflakes began to drift from a steel-colored sky. Jack had worked through the night to complete the last details: the shelf for dishes, the hooks for hanging clothes, the braided rug he had bought from a Swedish woman in town who made them to sell. When Clara walked through the door for the first time, she gasped. The single room was small but perfect, with the stone fireplace dominating one wall and a window on each side to let in light. Jack had built a bed frame and stuffed a mattress with fresh straw and covered it with quilts his mother had made years ago, one of the few things he had kept from his old life. There was a table with 2 chairs, a washstand with a proper basin and pitcher, and a small cookstove in the corner. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, filling the space with the scent of sage and lavender, and a fire crackled merrily in the fireplace, chasing away the November chill. "Jack," Clara breathed, turning in a slow circle. "It is beautiful, it is perfect." "You are safe here," Jack said, coming to stand behind her. "This is yours, Clara. No one can take it from you." She turned and threw her arms around his neck, and he caught her easily, holding her close. The snow fell harder outside, beginning to coat the ground in white. But inside the cabin they had built together, everything was warm and bright and full of promise. They spent that first evening christening the space, Clara cooking a simple stew on the new stove, while Jack sat at the table and watched her move around the kitchen area, marveling at how natural she looked, how much like home this already felt. After dinner, they sat before the fire, Clara nestled against Jack's side and talked about the future in careful, hopeful terms. "I should probably go into town at some point," Clara said quietly. "Find work, try to contribute something." "You do not need to worry about that right now," Jack said. "But if you want to, Mrs. Henderson at the Mercantile is always looking for help. She is a good woman, asks few questions." Clara nodded, then fell silent for a moment. "What if someone comes looking? What if there is a warrant?" Jack tightened his arm around her. "Then we will deal with it. I know the sheriff, Ben Calloway. He is a fair man. If it came to that, I would tell him the truth, and I believe he would listen. But Clara, you are defending yourself. You have a right to live, to be free, to be happy." "I am happy," Clara said, tilting her face up to look at him. "Right now, in this moment, I am happier than I have been in years. Maybe ever." Jack kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips, and the fire crackled softly beside them as the snow continued to fall, transforming the world outside into something clean and new. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt like the life Jack had always wanted but never dared to hope for. He would wake before dawn in his own house and walk through the early morning darkness to Clara's cabin, where she would have coffee brewing and breakfast waiting. They would eat together, talking about plans for the day, and then Jack would head out to tend his horses and cattle while Clara worked on making the cabin truly hers. She sewed curtains from fabric Jack bought in town, arranged wildflowers in a jar on the table even as winter deepened, and slowly, carefully, let herself believe this could last. In the evenings, Jack would return, often bringing fresh meat or supplies from town, and they would cook dinner together, bumping into each other in the small space and laughing about it. After the meal, they would sit by the fire and talk or read aloud from the books Jack owned, Treasure Island and Ivanhoe, and a worn copy of Whitman's poetry that had belonged to his mother. Sometimes Clara would fall asleep against his shoulder, and Jack would carry her to the bed, tuck her in carefully, and force himself to walk back to his own cold, empty house, respecting her unspoken need for space, for time to heal. But one night in early December, as a blizzard raged outside and the wind screamed around the cabin's corners, Clara caught his hand as he moved to leave. "Stay," she said simply. "I do not want to be alone tonight. I do not want you walking back in this storm." Jack searched her face, making sure he understood what she was offering. "Are you certain?" "I am certain," Clara said, and the look in her eyes held no fear, only trust and something deeper, something that made Jack's breath catch in his throat. He stayed. They lay together in the narrow bed, Clara's back pressed against Jack's chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her waist. He felt her relax by degrees, felt the moment she let herself truly rest, and he pressed a kiss into her hair and silently vowed that he would spend the rest of his life making sure she always felt this safe. December passed in a blur of snow and firelight and growing intimacy. Jack officially moved into the cabin, his few possessions fitting easily into the space Clara had made for him. They became partners in every sense, working together to care for the animals, to keep the cabin warm and supplied, to build a life that belonged to both of them. The physical aspect of their relationship deepened naturally, tenderly, with Jack always letting Clara set the pace, always making sure she felt cherished rather than claimed. "I love you," she told him one night as they lay tangled together beneath the quilts, the firelight painting golden patterns on the walls. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." "Do not be frightened," Jack murmured, running his fingers through her hair. "I am not going anywhere. I am yours for as long as you will have me." "Forever then," Clara said, and kissed him with a passion that still surprised them both. Christmas came, and with it a joy neither of them had expected. Jack cut a small pine tree and brought it into the cabin, and Clara decorated it with strings of popcorn and berries and paper stars. She folded from pages of an old catalog. Jack gave her a music box he had ordered from a jeweler in Cheyenne, a delicate thing that played a waltz when you opened the lid. Clara gave him a scarf she had knitted from wool she had unraveled from an old blanket, every stitch woven with love. They spent the day in bed, talking and laughing and making love, and when evening came they stood at the window and watched the sun set behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. "I want to marry you," Jack said suddenly, the words escaping before he could second-guess himself. "I know you were married before, and I know that ended badly, but Clara, I want you to be my wife. Not because society says we should, but because I want the whole world to know you chose me and I chose you, and nothing is going to change that." Clara turned to him, her eyes wide. For a terrible moment, Jack thought he had pushed too hard, too fast, but then her face broke into the most beautiful smile he had ever seen. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Jack Morrison, I will marry you. I will be your wife, and you will be my husband, and we will build a life together that is nothing like what came before." They married in late January, during a brief thaw that made travel to town possible. Sheriff Ben Calloway performed the ceremony in his office, with his wife Martha as witness. Jack had been nervous about introducing Clara to the lawman, worried about questions that might be asked, but Ben just shook her hand warmly and said, "Jack is a good man. Anyone he chooses is welcome in this town." Clara had relaxed after that, and when Ben pronounced them husband and wife, she kissed Jack with such enthusiasm that Martha laughed and clapped her hands. They celebrated with dinner at the hotel restaurant, a luxury neither of them could really afford but one that felt necessary to mark the occasion. Clara wore a blue dress that Martha had loaned her, and Jack had gotten his hair cut and put on the only suit he owned, and they felt like the wealthiest people in Wyoming territory. As they rode back to the ranch under a sky full of stars, Clara leaned back against Jack's chest and sighed contentedly. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for building me a home. Thank you for loving me when I did not think I could be loved." "Thank you for letting me," Jack replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for choosing to stay." Winter gave way to spring, the snow melting to reveal green grass and wildflowers that carpeted the meadows in purple and yellow. Jack's ranch prospered, his horses gaining a reputation for quality throughout the territory. Clara took the job at the mercantile, and Mrs. Henderson proved to be exactly the kind of employer Jack had promised, kind and understanding and grateful for Clara's help. The women of Cheyenne slowly welcomed Clara into their circle, and she began to make friends, to put down roots that went deeper than just her relationship with Jack. In May, Clara realized she was pregnant. She told Jack one evening as they sat on the porch he had built onto the cabin, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. "We are going to have a baby," she said, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach. Jack froze, the magnitude of the news washing over him. Then a grin spread across his face, so wide it almost hurt, and he let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral. He swept Clara into his arms and spun her around, laughing like a child. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." Clara laughed too, tears streaming down her face, happy tears this time. "Are you pleased? Pleased, Clara, I am the happiest man alive. You have given me everything. You are everything." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, Clara blooming with health and happiness. Jack fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more, eat more, let him handle the heavier chores. She tolerated his overprotectiveness with good humor, knowing it came from love. They spent long evenings talking about the future, about the child they would raise together, about the values they would instill, kindness and strength, and the importance of treating others with dignity. "I want our children to know they are loved," Clara said one night, her hands resting on her swollen belly. "I want them to grow up in a home full of laughter and warmth where they feel safe to be themselves." "They will," Jack promised. "We will make sure of it." Their son was born on a cold December morning, exactly 1 year after Jack had finished building the cabin. The labor was long and difficult, attended by Martha Calloway, who had assisted with dozens of births over the years. Jack paced outside, terrified by the sounds coming from the cabin, until Martha finally opened the door and said, "Come meet your son." Jack entered to find Clara propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. The baby had dark hair like Jack and green eyes like Clara, and when Jack took him in his arms for the first time, he felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. "What should we name him?" Clara asked, watching Jack with love shining in her eyes. Jack looked at his son, at this perfect little person who represented everything good and hopeful in the world. "Samuel," he said. "After my mother's father, he was the only one in my family who ever showed me real kindness." "Samuel Morrison," Clara said, testing the name. "It is perfect." They settled into the beautiful chaos of life with a newborn. Jack took on even more of the ranch work, insisting Clara focus on recovering and caring for Samuel. But Clara was strong, stronger than he sometimes gave her credit for, and within weeks she was back to her routines, the baby strapped to her chest as she moved through the cabin, cooking and cleaning and somehow making it all look effortless. Samuel grew into a happy, healthy child, quick to smile and curious about everything. Jack would take him out to the corrals as soon as he could walk, letting him pet the gentle horses and laugh at the chickens. Clara would watch from the cabin window, her heart full to bursting with gratitude for the life they had built. The years flowed by like the creek beside their cabin, steady and life-giving. Jack expanded the ranch, building additional corrals and a larger barn. Clara became indispensable at the mercantile, eventually becoming Mrs. Henderson's partner when the older woman decided to step back from daily operations. They added a room onto the cabin for Samuel, and then another when their daughter Rose was born 3 years after her brother, a fierce little girl with Clara's blonde hair and Jack's stubborn chin. The shadow of Clara's past never fully disappeared. Occasionally, Jack would wake in the night to find her sitting by the window, staring out at the darkness, and he knew she was thinking about the man she had killed, about the life she had fled. He never pushed her to talk about it unless she wanted to, just pulled her back to bed and held her until she relaxed. One day, when Samuel was 5 and Rose was 2, Sheriff Calloway rode out to the ranch. Jack's heart sank when he saw the lawman approaching, fear flooding through him. But Ben just dismounted and accepted the coffee Clara offered, then said, "I wanted you to know that Thomas Brennan's death has been officially ruled a justifiable homicide. A peddler came through last month who had seen the whole thing, saw him attack you, Clara. He gave a statement. There is no warrant, no charges, you are free. Clara's hands flew to her mouth and she started to cry, great heaving sobs of relief. Jack wrapped his arms around her while Ben politely looked away, giving them a moment. When Clara finally composed herself, she took Ben's hand in both of hers. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for telling me." "You are a good woman, Clara Morrison," Ben said. "This town is lucky to have you, both of you." After Ben left, Jack and Clara stood together on the porch, watching their children play in the yard, the mountains standing eternal in the distance. "It is really over," Clara said wonderingly. "I am really free." "You have always been free," Jack said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But I am glad the law finally agrees." More years passed, golden years full of love and laughter and the everyday miracles of family life. Samuel grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's way with horses and his mother's business sense. Rose became a force of nature, fearless and kind in equal measure, determined to make her mark on the world. Jack and Clara added another son, William, when Rose was 4, and then finally another daughter, Emma, 3 years after that. The cabin had been expanded so many times it barely resembled the simple structure Jack had built that November before the first snow. It sprawled across the clearing, rambling and comfortable, filled with the noise and energy of a large family. The ranch prospered beyond Jack's wildest dreams, covering hundreds of acres and employing several hands to help with the work. But despite the growth and success, Jack's favorite times were still the quiet moments with Clara. They would steal away sometimes, leaving the children with one of the ranch hands and ride up into the mountains to the spot where Jack had first found Clara all those years ago. The makeshift shelter was long gone, reclaimed by nature, but they both remembered exactly where it had been. "Do you ever regret it?" Jack asked one summer evening as they sat together on a fallen log, watching the sun set. "Do you ever wish you had kept running, found somewhere else to go?" Clara looked at him, her face showing the lines of years and laughter, but still beautiful, still the woman who had captured his heart. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "You gave me a life, Jack. You gave me a home and a family and a reason to believe in goodness again. I would not change a single thing." Jack pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, still amazed after all these years that she was his. "I love you, Clara Morrison. I loved you in those woods when you were broken and scared, and I love you now, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I love you," Clara replied, tilting her face up for a kiss. "My cowboy, my hero, my home." They stayed on the ranch for the rest of their lives, watching their children grow and marry and have children of their own. Samuel took over the daily operations of the ranch when Jack's back started giving him trouble in his 60s, running it with the same care and integrity his father had instilled. Rose married a schoolteacher and opened a school in Cheyenne, educating a generation of children with patience and passion. William became a veterinarian, one of the first in the territory, and Emma followed her mother into business, eventually owning 3 mercantiles across Wyoming. Jack and Clara became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family, their cabin always filled with grandchildren who begged for stories about the old days, about how Grandpa had built Grandma a cabin before the first snow, about how their love had started in tragedy and grown into something beautiful and lasting. Clara would always tear up a little during these retellings, and Jack would squeeze her hand and finish the story the same way every time. "Love is not just a feeling," he would tell the children, their faces rapt with attention. "It is a choice you make every single day. It is choosing to build a home for someone, even when it is hard. It is choosing to stay, even when leaving would be easier. It is choosing to believe in tomorrow, even when today is dark. Your grandmother taught me that. She taught me that broken things can be mended, that wounded hearts can heal, that love is the strongest force in this world." On a warm September evening in 1925, when Jack was 73 and Clara was 72, they sat together on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Their children and grandchildren had gathered for a celebration, 47 years to the day since Jack had found Clara in the woods, and the sound of laughter and music drifted from inside. "We did all right, did we not?" Clara said, her hand clasped in Jack's, their fingers intertwined as they had been for nearly 5 decades. "We did better than all right," Jack replied, his voice still strong despite his years. "We built something beautiful, Clara. We built a life worth living." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. The cabin stood solid around them, weathered by time but strong, its walls holding within them decades of memories, of love, of a family built on the foundation of one man's kindness and one woman's courage. The first snow would come soon, just as it had every year, blanketing the land in white and bringing with it the quiet beauty of winter. But inside the cabin Jack had built all those years ago, the fire would burn bright, and the warmth of family and love would keep the cold at bay, just as it always had, just as it always would. That was the true miracle, Clara thought as she watched their youngest grandchild chase fireflies across the yard. Not that Jack had built her a cabin before the first snow, though that had saved her life. The miracle was that he had seen her, truly seen her, when she was at her most broken and vulnerable, and he had chosen to love her anyway. He had given her time and space and safety, and in return, she had given him her heart, her trust, her whole self. Together, they had created something that would outlast them both, a legacy of love that would echo through generations. Their great-grandchildren would tell the story to their children, and their children to theirs, the tale of the cowboy who found a woman sleeping in the woods and loved her enough to build her a home, to give her a future, to show her that even the darkest night eventually gives way to dawn. As the evening deepened and the celebration continued around them, Jack turned to Clara and said the same words he had said to her every single day for the past 47 years, words that had become a ritual, a prayer, a promise kept. "I am glad I found you." And Clara, as she always did, smiled and replied, "I am glad you did too. I am so very glad you did." They kissed then, soft and sweet, while their family laughed and celebrated inside the cabin, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance, and the mountains stood watch as they had for millennia, bearing witness to one more love story in a world that desperately needed them. The cabin would stand for generations, a testament to what could be built when two broken people chose to heal together, when kindness triumphed over cruelty, when love proved stronger than fear. And every winter, when the first snow fell on that small clearing by the creek, it would blanket the roof of the cabin in white, just as it had that November day in 1878 when Jack Morrison finished building a home for the woman he loved, the woman who had been sleeping in the woods, waiting without knowing it for someone to see her, to choose her, to love her enough to give her shelter from the storm. That was where their story had truly begun, not in tragedy or violence or pain, but in a moment of compassion, in the decision of one man to do the right thing, to help someone who needed it, and in doing so, to find the love he had been searching for his entire life. Everything else, the family and the ranch and the decades of happiness, had grown from that single seed of kindness, watered by devotion and tended with care until it blossomed into something magnificent. Jack and Clara lived to see their 80th birthdays, their bodies slowing but their love as strong as ever. When Jack finally passed in his sleep one winter night, his hand clasped in Clara's, she mourned him deeply but without bitterness, grateful for every moment they had shared. She lived another 2 years, surrounded by family, telling stories and dispensing wisdom, and when she closed her eyes for the last time, her children swore she was smiling, as if she could already see Jack waiting for her on the other side. They buried them side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains they had both loved. The headstone was simple, bearing their names and dates and a single line that Samuel had chosen, words his father had spoken so many times, words that captured the essence of who they had been. Love is a choice we make every single day. The cabin still stands, maintained by generations of Morrisons who understand that it represents more than just wood and stone. It represents hope, second chances, the transformative power of love, and the truth that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with a journey outward but with the decision to open your heart to another person, to build something together, to create a home where there had only been wilderness. Every November, on the anniversary of its completion, the family gathers at the cabin for a celebration. They light a fire in the old stone fireplace, share a meal around the table that has been replaced twice but still sits in the same spot, and tell the story one more time. The story of Clara, who survived the unthinkable and had the courage to accept help when it was offered. The story of Jack, who looked at a stranger and saw someone worth saving, worth loving, worth building a future with. And always, at the end, someone will look out the window at the mountains and the pines and the creek still bubbling nearby, and they will say what Clara herself said every year until she died, the simple truth that summed up everything. He built me a cabin before the first snow, and in doing so, he gave me my life back. He taught me that home is not a place but a person, and that love, real love, is not about possession or control, but about creating space for another person to heal, to grow, to become fully themselves. That is the greatest gift anyone can give. The story lives on, told and retold, a reminder that even in the hardest times, even in the wild and unforgiving West, kindness and love could flourish. That two people, damaged by life but not defeated by it, could find each other and build something beautiful. That sometimes, the most heroic thing a person can do is simply choose to care, to see another person's pain and respond with compassion rather than judgment. Jack Morrison did not slay a dragon or win a war or perform any feat that would make it into history books. But he did something infinitely more important. He saw a woman sleeping in the woods, vulnerable and afraid, and he built her a cabin before the first snow. He gave her shelter and safety and love, and in return, she gave him a life richer and fuller than he had ever imagined possible. That is the story. That is the legacy. That is the love that changed everything, the kind of love that reminds us all what we are capable of when we choose compassion over indifference, when we build rather than destroy, when we offer our hand to someone who has fallen and help them rise again. It is a love story set in the Wild West, but its truth is timeless, universal, eternal. And it began with a simple act of kindness on an October morning in 1878, when a cowboy discovered a woman sleeping in the woods and made the decision that would define both their lives. He built her a cabin before the first snow, and in doing so, he built them both a future.